Hello and welcome to this Foster Care Institute online training webinar. Resident Rights of Youth in Foster Care. I'm your host, Dr. John DeGarmo, founder and director of the Foster Care Institute. I'm an author of several best-selling foster care books, an international speaker and trainer for child welfare programs and foster care institutes. And my wife and I have been foster parents to over 60 plus children that have come through our home and joined our family over the years. Indeed, in our home there is no label, no biological, no foster, nor adoptive child. They're all our children, they're all our members of our family, and they all have rights. The goal of this training webinar is to increase your awareness of the rights that children and youth in foster care do have. And we're going to look at the rights not only at a national level, but also at a state level when it comes to the state of Georgia. So let's dive right in. It's important to recognize the rights that children already have. Indeed, children's rights were first recognized after the First World War, which of course ended in 1918, between 1914 and 1918. Rights of children were recognized after the war concluded with the adoption of what is known as the Declaration of Geneva. And this declaration came about in 1924, 6 years after the end of World War I. Now let's look at what some definitions of rights are. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, they define rights as the following. Quote, rights are legal, social, or ethical principles of freedom or entitlement. That is, rights are the fundamental normative rules about what is allowed of people or owed to people according to some legal system, social convention, or ethical theory. End quote. And again, thank you to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy for this definition. Our next definition comes from the United Nations, and they define rights as the following. Quote, human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. Human rights include the right to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion and expression, the right to work and education, and many more. Everyone is entitled to these rights without discrimination. End quote. And again, thank you to the United Nations for their definition of rights. And finally, we have a third definition of rights, this time coming to us from the Equity and Human Rights Commission. And they define rights as following. Quote, human rights are the basic rights and freedoms that belong to every person in the world from birth until death. They apply regardless of where you are from, what you believe, or how you choose to live your life. They can never be taken away, although they can sometimes be restricted. For example, if a person breaks a law or in the interests of national security. These basic rights are based on shared values like dignity, fairness, equality, respect, and independence. End quote. And again, thank you for the Equity and Human Rights Commission for this definition of rights. Now let's dig into a little bit more of the history. We noted that human rights was defined in 1924, let's look what happened in 1959. In this year, in 1959, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Declaration of the Rights of the Child. And that declaration defined children's rights to protection, to education, to health care, to shelter, and to good and healthy nutrition. As you can imagine, this was instrumental and monumental when it comes to defining rights for children. "30 years later, in 1989, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, also known as CRC, defined a child, any human being below the age of 18 years, unless the law is applicable to the child the majority is attained earlier." End quote. Now, let's look at what the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, again, the UNCRC, outlined rights for. They outlined 4 classifications of rights for children. And these rights, these 4 rights, included civil rights, political rights, social rights, and economic and cultural rights. Let's dig into further into what the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child said about rights. According to the UNCRC, children and youth have a right to survival. And they say this: a child's right to survival begins before a child is born. According to Government of India, a child's life begins after 20 weeks of conception. Hence, the right to survival is inclusive of the child's rights to be born, right to minimum standards of food, shelter, and clothing, and the right to live with dignity. The right to protection, according to the UNCRC, every child has the right to be protected from neglect, exploitation, abuse at home, and abuse elsewhere. Now, it's important to note here in regards to protection, the rights of protection for children and youth, that youth in foster care are often placed due to neglect and abuse. So we can see how youth in foster care have this right of protection when so many are coming from environments of abuse and neglect. The third right, according to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, was a right to participation. And the UNCRC says this: a child has a right to participate in any decision making that involves him or her directly or indirectly. There are varying degrees of participation in regards to the child's age and the maturity of that child. Finally, the fourth right is the right to development. According to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, children have the right to all forms of development: emotional development, mental development, physical development. Emotional development is fulfilled by proper care and love of a support system. Mental development is through education and learning. And finally, physical development comes through recreation, play, and nutrition. All of these can be found at the Center for Child Protection.org. Now, we've looked at the rights of children and youth on a global perspective. But do children in foster care have rights? The youth that you are working with, the youth that you're caring for, the youth that are in the home that you are at, do these youth, these teenagers coming from neglect, abandonment, abuse, homelessness, do they have rights? Do they have rights when it comes to foster care? Well, they do. Indeed, several states have what is known as a foster child Bill of Rights. Now, not all states have this bill, many do. And in each of these foster care Bill of Rights, when it comes to state, there are many similarities and there are also many differences in the foster child Bill of Rights from one state to the next. Before we look at what the rights of youth in foster care have, let us look at what a foster child is defined by. According to dictionary.com, a child who is raised by someone who is not their biological or adoptive parent is a quote-unquote foster child. In addition, a needy child, such as one living in an impoverished country, supported or aided by a contribution to a specific charity, is a foster child. Again, this comes to us from dictionary.com. And I think we can rely upon the first one. Now, if you've read any of my books or seen other webinars here at the Foster Care Institute, you know that I prefer the term youth in foster care or child in foster care. I believe it's important that we avoid the term foster child or foster teen or foster youth because it is a label. Now, when it comes to the state of Georgia, do youth have rights? Well, let's look at the Georgia Division of Family and Children's Services Child Welfare Policy Manual. The policy manual put out in 2015 by the Georgia Division of Family and Children's Services, otherwise known as DFACS. Indeed, DFACS does have a policy when it comes to rights of youth in foster care. And they say this: each youth in foster care who has attained the age of 14 years of age shall have the following rights. Before we dig into that further, let's look at what the National Council of State Legislators Safeguard for Children in Foster Care Act says. When it comes to the rights of youth, well, it's important that we ensure that the foster child, again, this is their words, is treated with nutrients and respect, cherished by a family of his or her own, heard and involved in decisions, involved with his or her birth family, if appropriate, friends, teachers, and relatives, allowed access to his or her caseworker and an attorney ad litem in receipt of appropriate education, training, and preparation for citizenship, in receipt of quality child welfare services, individualized care, notification of changes, and provided with a plan for the future. Again, this comes from the National Council of State Legislators Safeguard for Children in Foster Care Act. So we can see here that the youth that we are caring for, the youth that we're working with, they have the right to be treated with respect. They have the right to be heard and involved in any sort of decision making when it comes to their future. They have the right to be involved with their birth family if it's appropriate and safe, as well as friends, teachers, and relatives. They have the right to have access to their caseworker, as well as an attorney ad litem, or perhaps a guardian ad litem, or even a CASA. They have the right to have any notification of any changes made in their case plan. They have the right to help when it comes to planning their future. But let's go back to DFACS. The right to be fair and equitable treatment by the Division of Family and Children's Services, foster parents, and other parents in the case of children in foster care. This is according to their policy. All right? Children and youth in foster care have the right to the following things. They have the right to be safe from abuse, neglect, exploitation. Indeed, when you're caring for youth at the home, you are protecting them from abuse and neglect and exploitation. Youth in foster care have the right to know why they are in the child welfare system. They have the right to have their educational needs met. Now, this is critical. As we've seen here at the Foster Care Institute and in many studies, youth in foster care are on average 18 months behind academically and struggle with reading and math skills. In addition, or perhaps as a result, if you will, 55% of youth in foster care will quit school. Many times, youth in foster care do not have their educational needs met as they go from one home to the next, one placement to the next, one environment to the next. They fall further and further behind. Therefore, it's important for us as caregivers and staff members to ensure that they have their educational needs met so they can be successful in school. In addition, the youth that you are working with, the youth that you're caring for, the youth in your home, according to DFACS, have the rights to have their health needs met. They have the right to have community connections with their family, with those in their community. And these connections might include visitations, telephone calls, perhaps emails or letters, virtual calls, etc. The youth that you're working with, according to DFACS, have the right to regular, ongoing opportunities to engage in age or developmentally appropriate activities. These appropriate activities, according to age or their development, might include learning social skills, might include learning living skills, might include entertainment, might include driving lessons. There's so much there, but they have the right for these activities. DFACS also states that youth in foster care have the right to intensive, ongoing efforts made to reunify them with their birth family, their parents, their relatives, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, perhaps older siblings, or they have the right to ongoing efforts made to secure them a safe, permanent home, otherwise known as permanency. Now, it is important to note that the end result of foster care is that of reunification. 50% of youth in foster care will be reunified. And we also know that there are thousands of youth in foster care who are never reunified, nor are they never adopted or given any sense of permanency when it comes to a permanent home or permanent family. Yet they do have that right. They do have that right to help with reunification. They do have that right to a safe, secure, permanent home. After all, isn't that what each youth in foster care wants? Permanency of some kind. DFACS states that youth in foster care have the right to participate in the development of their case plan. They have the right to review their case plan, to resign their case plan, to receive a copy of their case plan if they wish. Now, in addition, one member of the case planning team may be designated to be the youth's advisor or their advocate when it comes to the application of the reasonable and prudent parent standards to the youth. And we have a whole webinar here at the Foster Care Institute on prudent parenting that you might wish to view. DFACS goes on to say that youth in foster care have the right to choose up to 2 members of the case planning team who are neither their foster parent nor caseworker. They have the right to participate in court proceedings regarding their family. The youth that you're working with have the right to receive the services needed to help them transition to adulthood. This also is critical. We noted earlier that 55% of youth in foster care will drop out of school. Sadly, as a result, perhaps 65% will end up homeless, 75% will end up incarcerated at some point. As you can see, the transition to adulthood, transitioning out of the system, or perhaps aging out of the system, often leads to grim statistics for youth in foster care and a grim reality. It is up to us as caregivers to recognize that youth have these rights, these services, and to help them transition to an adult. Youth in foster care have the right to receive a free copy of their consumer credit report. Very likely they may not understand their consumer credit report. It is up to us as staff members and caregivers to help them understand their consumer credit report. After all, this is important for them as they go forth in adulthood, to understand their credit. Youth in foster care have the right to receive an official or a certified United States birth certificate, Social Security card, driver's license or identification card, health insurance information, and medical records when leaving foster care at the age of 18 years or older. Now they have this right to their driver's license, birth certificate, social security card, etc. But they may not know how to go about receiving it or getting access to it. Therefore, it is important for you as staff members to help them learn how to gain access to it, learn how they can get a copy of such. You may have to help them in this process. In fact, they may be counting upon you to help them in this process. Youth in foster care have the right to receive an age-appropriate description of their rights and a personal copy. Finally, DFAC states that youth in foster care have the right to a personal advocate to support them through any sort of grievance process. We thank DFACS, the state of Georgia, for these rights. Now let's look at the rights on a national level. Rights as defined by the National Foster Parent Association, otherwise known as the NFPA. And they created a Foster Child Bill of Rights in 1973. This has been revised several times through the years, but this is what it looked like in 1973. And currently, it's very, very similar. Every child in foster care is endowed with the rights inherently belonging to all children, according to the National Foster Parent Association. In addition, because of the temporary or permanent separation from and loss of parents and other family members, the child requires special safeguards, resources, and care. This is according to the National Foster Parent Association Foster Child Bill of Rights. And according to the NFPA, every child in foster care, every youth in foster care, has the inherent right to be cherished by a family of his own, either his family, helped by readily available services and supports to resume his care, or an adoptive family, or by plan a continuing foster family. How does this affect the youth that you're working with? Well, they have the right to be cherished. They have the right to be supported. They have the right to be cared for. And they have the right to do it from you. They may be looking from you. Youth in foster care have the right to receive continuing loving care and respect as a unique human being, a child growing in trust in himself and others. As you may know, many youth in foster care might be coming from an environment where they never received any sort of consistent, continuous, loving care or respect. They need this from you. As you work with them, they need to feel nurtured. They need to feel cared for. They need to feel loved. They need to feel respected as a human being. After all, this is their right. The National Foster Parent Association states that youth in foster care have the right to be nurtured by foster parents who have been selected to meet his individual needs, who have provided services and supports, including specialized education, so they can grow in their ability to enable the child to reach his potentiality. Again, they're living in a residential home. They do not have foster parents, but they have you. You might be their only positive parental figure in their life currently. And they're counting on you to help them get that specialized education, to get those services and supports, so they can reach their potential, their full potential. Without you, without your support, without your care, they may never receive or reach that potential. Youth in foster care have the right to receive sensitive, continuing help and understanding and accepting the reasons for his own family's inability to take care of him, and in developing confidence in his own self-worth. Let's look at that last phrase again. Developing confidence in his own self-worth. You can help him develop that confidence. He has the right to develop confidence in his own self-worth. It's up to you, perhaps, to help them do so. Youth in foster care have the right to grow up in freedom and dignity in a neighborhood of people who accept him with understanding, respect, and friendship. Where you work, hopefully there is the freedom of dignity. There is the acceptance, understanding, and respect and friendship. The neighborhood of people that he is living with is the residential home that you work at. The National Foster Parent Association states that youth in foster care have the right to receive help in overcoming deprivation or whatever distortion in his emotional, physical, intellectual, social, and spiritual growth that may have resulted from his earlier experiences. Experiences before he's placed in the home, experiences of abuse, experiences of neglect. He has the right to overcome that. Youth in foster care have the right to receive education, training, career guidance to prepare for a youthful and satisfying life. Now, there are some staff members where you work who are more adept at helping with their education, who may be more adept or specialize in helping youth get the training they need. There may be staff members who are, their specific goal is on career guidance. The youth that you're caring for, the youth that you're working with, have the right to get this training, to get this career guidance, so they can better prepare for life outside of foster care, better prepare for life outside the residential home. It's up to you to help them ensure that they get that education, they get that training, they get that career guidance, or to point them and guide them to those who can help them in this regard. Youth in foster care have the right, according to the NFPA, to receive preparation for citizenship and parenthood through interaction with foster parents and other adults who are consistent role models. You are that adult. You are one who is a consistent role model for them. You can help them prepare for future parenthood because they're watching you. They're listening to you. You, once again, are a parental figure in their life. They may come from an environment where they never had a positive parental figure, a positive parental role model in their life. They're looking to you. They're watching you. They're listening to you. Indeed, this is a responsibility. It's a heavy responsibility, but it's a responsibility that we shall all embrace. Because each of us is a role model in some way. And when you're working with youth in foster care, it's important to recognize that you are a role model of how to act as an adult and perhaps as a future parent. The National Foster Parent Association states that youth in foster care have the right to be represented by an attorney at law in administrative or judicial proceedings with access to fair hearings, court reviews of decisions, so that his best interests are safeguarded. Finally, the National Foster Parent Association states that youth in foster care have the right to receive a high quality of child welfare services, including involvement of the natural parents and his own involvement in major decisions that affect his life. He has the right to receive those child welfare services that can help him make major decisions that affect his life. As we know, many times youth in foster care do not know how to make major decisions because they've never been given the opportunity to do so. They have never been given the trust to do so. They have never learned those social skills, those living skills to help them prepare for their life after care. They have never been taught those skills. They have never been modeled those skills. It's up to you. In fact, it is your responsibility to help these youth make major decisions that affect their lives, to sit down with them and discuss with them. What does life look like outside of foster care? What does life look like after high school? Youth in foster care have rights as defined by the National Foster Parent Association, as defined by Georgia DFACS, as defined by the United Nations, etc. Now, it's important for us as caregivers to recognize in order for these youth to receive these rights, it's our responsibility to help them understand their rights, to gain their rights, to have access to all of their rights. You see, when it comes to rights, there are also responsibilities. We have the responsibility and the gift, if you will, to help youth in foster care navigate the many challenges they have so when they do transition out, when they do age out of the system, they are completely and fully prepared and supported. I want to thank the National Foster Parent Association, the NFPA, for their definition of these rights. Foster parenting and caring for children in foster care can be a struggle, particularly when you're working with youth in foster care. Check out the little book of foster care wisdom for some daily tips and daily words of inspiration. And there are many books available at the Foster Care Institute for you as well. For much more on rights and responsibilities and so much more, visit the Foster Care Institute at drjohndegarmofostercare.com. Follow me on Facebook at Dr. John DeGarmo Foster Care Institute, on Twitter at Dr. John DeGarmo, and email me with any questions you might have at drjohndegarmo@gmail.com. Yes, youth in foster care do have rights, but most likely they will not recognize these rights or be aware of these rights or learn how to gain access to these rights. It is our responsibility as caregivers of youth in crisis, our responsibility to help them understand, gain access, and to thrive from the many rights they do have. I want to thank you for watching this webinar. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, and more importantly, I want to thank you for helping youth in crisis who are struggling, youth in crisis who need someone like you to help them thrive, help them succeed, help them gain confidence, and help them gain access to the rights that they have. For the Foster Care Institute, I'm Dr. John DeGarmo.